What if Robb Stark never followed his heart? What if he listened to the man who raised him to value honor, but taught him to use it as a sword, not a shackle? Imagine a world where Catelyn's tears weren't the only thing guiding the young. Wolf's heart, but his father's ghostly wisdom whispered in every decision. It all starts the moment Ned Stark didn't die at King's Landing. The sword never fell. Varys, sensing the winds shifting too violently, played a dangerous card. He bought Ned time, not mercy, but something like it. Before Joffrey could shout, before Sansa could scream, the whispering eunuch whispered one final threat into Cersei's ear. "Kill the Hand and the realm burns sooner than you think." She hesitated, and in that hesitation Lord Eddard Stark was not executed but sent to the wall. His name disgraced, yes, his house broken, yes, but his mind intact, and more importantly, he was alive. Far to the north, Robb's war still began. The banners still rose, Riverrun still swore loyalty. But the boy king was no longer just fighting for vengeance. He was fighting for strategy. Maester Luwin's raven carried a coded message from Castle Black. "Hold fast. Do not wed. Listen. To the wind, not your heart." Robb read the message under torchlight. He read it once, then again, then again. Not just because he missed his father's counsel, but because he could feel the shift in tone. This wasn't the Ned Stark who had died with honor. This was a man who had learned that honor alone couldn't win wars. Talisa Maegir still nursed, the wounded in his camp. Her eyes still lingered on him. But that night after the raven came, he didn't return her glance. He barely even looked in her direction. And that single moment, just a missed glance, was the beginning of a new Westeros. The phrase came. Lord Walder offered his daughters. Robb, with lips pressed tightly and jaw clenched, accepted. Not out of affection, not for the beauty of any Frey girl, but because his father's words echoed like steel inside him. If you mean to wear the crown of the North, you must bleed for it, not in battle, in sacrifice. And so he bled, emotionally. The wedding was quiet, awkward, cold, but it happened. The Freys rejoiced. Edmure sulked but accepted his own betrothal as part of the arrangement. Catelyn watched her son, seated beside his new wife, and knew something in him had hardened. Perhaps it was wisdom, perhaps it was pain, but it was. Something Ned would have approved of, the Riverlands held. No betrayal brewed at the twins, no red wine soaked the floors of a red wedding. Lord Walder stayed loyal, not out of love, but out of pride. His daughter sat beside a king now, and he would not give up that status, not when the North began to win. Yes, they began to win. With Frey support solidified, the Boltons didn't see the need to defect. Rose remained cold, calculating, but loyal, at least on the surface. The Lannisters, spread thin and reeling from Stannis Baratheons, fury at Blackwater, faced a northern army that was not only intact but growing. More houses pledged themselves to Robb, not because they loved him, but because they believed in him. And every night as he sharpened his sword, he thought of his father, of the man who had once failed because he played by rules that no longer existed. Robb swore he wouldn't repeat the same mistake. Okay, pause. Are you feeling this shift right now? Because what happens next? This next move, it flips the whole Game of Thrones board upside down. And if you think this new Robb is going to stop at Lannister lands, oh no. You're not ready for the way he shakes Westeros to its bones. Back at Castle Black, Ned Stark didn't sit idle. He didn't rot away in silence like so many expected. He wrote, not just to Robb, but to Stannis, to Mace Tyrell, even to Doran Martell. He reminded them all what was coming. Winter, the real threat. He reminded them that dragons were stirring in the east, that a queen with Targaryen blood and a growing army might one day land on their shores. But more than that, he told them the truth. About Cersei. About her children. About the lie that started it all. His letters were risky. They traveled on ravens that might not reach their mark, but some did. One reached Dragonstone. Stannis read it in silence, jaw twitching. The Red Woman burned no fires that night. She listened as the one true king plotted a new course, one that involved an uneasy alliance with the boy in the north and the fallen wolf at the wall. Because if Ned Stark was telling the truth about everything, then the realm was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Meanwhile, in the south, Tywin Lannister tightened his grip. He saw Robb's new Frey bride. He saw the Boltons still marching under the wolf banner. He saw the Riverlands slipping out of his control. And he knew. The boy was not his father's son. No, he was something worse. He was his father's vengeance made flesh. And Cersei. She screamed. She screamed when Sansa disappeared from the Red Keep, vanished like smoke through the fingers of her guards. She screamed when Tyrion dared suggest that Robb might win this war. She screamed when Joffrey ordered a retaliation and no one moved. They were losing. And for once they knew it. Oh, and Talisa, she returned home, her heart heavy but her life spared. She never became a queen. She never died by the hands of Frey blades. She lived watching the man she once loved rise into a legend she could barely recognize. And Robb? He never looked back, not once. He learned, as his father should have, that love was a luxury kings could not afford. Robb Stark's marriage to the Frey girl changed everything. The Banners stayed loyal, the twins remained neutral ground, and the northern cause stood unbroken. But not all was peace within his camp. Trust became a currency harder to earn than gold. Men whispered when he walked past. Some still loved him. Others merely followed because they feared him more than they feared the Lannisters. A king without love was one thing. A king without loyalty, that was something else entirely. Yet Robb understood what few of his age did. Loyalty could be bought, shaped, or scared into place, but it could never be assumed. So he made moves. Smart ones. Dangerous ones. He began holding war councils not just with Great John Umber and Roose Bolton, but with lesser lords, even common-born captains. He listened. He asked questions. He made them feel seen. And for a while it worked. But then came the problem of the Vale. Lady Lysa Arryn had refused to join the war outright, hiding behind her gates and her madness. But now, with Sansa Stark, newly escaped from King's Landing and heading north, Robb saw an opportunity. Sansa wasn't just his sister, she was leverage. To have Stark in the Eyrie meant influence over the Vale, and that could mean 10,000 more swords. Sansa arrived in Riverrun under heavy guard. Her hair was shorter, her eyes older. She had seen too much. When she stepped into her brother's war tent, she didn't cry. She didn't even smile. She simply said, "I thought you were dead." Robb stood speechless, and in that moment the war stopped, not in Westeros but inside them. She told him everything, about Joffrey, about Cersei, about the court that paraded her father's name, through the mud and let her suffer in silence. She didn't cry, not once. But when she finished speaking, Robb sat down slowly and said, "You'll be safer in the Eyrie." Sansa blinked. "Lysa won't let me in." "She will," Robb replied. "You'll be the Stark who reclaims the Vale. You'll be more than safe, Sansa. You'll be powerful." "Okay, hold up. Did you feel that? That wasn't just a reunion. That was the birth of a new political weapon. And you won't believe how it changes the entire fate of the North and the Riverlands in just a few scenes." Sansa left within the week, flanked by trusted men, and bearing a sealed letter from Robb himself. In it he offered not just peace to Lady Lysa, but a promise, protection, recognition, and a future alliance sealed in blood. Not marriage, not war. Something colder, smarter. A strategic merger of family and land. If Sansa could win her aunt over, Robb would have the Eyrie, and with it the Eastern Mountains secured. Meanwhile, Roose Bolton watched all this with a calculating eye. He never trusted the Freys. And now that their daughter had married the king in the north, he trusted them even less. His bastard son, Ramsay, had been let loose in the Dreadfort, tasked with stabilizing the north in the king's absence. But Roose knew what that really meant. Chaos, fear, and worse. Back in Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister read every raven with growing frustration. His plans were failing. He couldn't break the north with betrayal. He couldn't bleed them with marriage. He needed something far more drastic. And so he turned to the only force left unbroken by Robb's diplomacy, House Greyjoy. Theon Greyjoy had been Robb's friend once, brother even. But when Balon Greyjoy declared himself king of the Iron Islands, Theon chose blood over bonds. He took Winterfell. He burned it, or so he claimed. In truth, Bran and Rickon had escaped, lost to the wind and to rumour. Still, the damage was done. The North was hurt, wounded, divided. Robb hadn't forgotten. But this time, with the phrase on his side and no red wedding to fear, he sent a message to the Iron Islands: surrender Theon or face extinction. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Balon laughed. The boy thinks he's a kraken now. But Yara Greyjoy didn't laugh. She saw something her father didn't. The North wasn't dying. It was uniting. And if Robb came for the islands next, there wouldn't be much left. So she made a bold choice. Yara sent a raven, a private one. She offered Theon's return in exchange for peace, true peace, a fleet to protect the northern coast, an end to raids, a marriage alliance even, if Robb would take it. And just when you think Robb's about to say yes, he doesn't. He refuses because this time he doesn't need them. Instead, he turns his gaze to Stannis. Yes, that Stannis, the king without a throne, the lord of Dragonstone. The man everyone feared, but no one followed. Robb made a proposal: join forces, march together. He'd recognize Stannis as king of the Seven Kingdoms. If Stannis recognized Robb as king in the north, the offer was written in fire. Stannis, brooding and cold, sat by the flames with Melisandre whispering in his ear. He read the letter, then burned it. But not in rejection. He burned it as sacrifice, a sign. And the flames whispered back. The wolf's blood burns clean. Melisandre said, the true enemy waits in the north. He knows, he feels it. So Stannis wrote back, he accepted. Now pause right here, because this is where the story goes off the rails. You've got Stannis Baratheon and Robb Stark combining forces. You've got Sansa unlocking the veil. You've got the Freys still loyal, the Boltons biding their time, and Tywin freaking Lannister losing control of the chessboard. And oh yeah, you've still got Daenerys across the narrow sea, watching, waiting, because when the north doesn't fall, she doesn't rush in, she plans. The wind howled across the north like a wounded beast. Snow had begun to fall early that year, thicker and more brutal than anyone remembered. And yet, the drums of war still thundered. Robb Stark stood on the edge of a map, his fingers hovering. Above the twins, then to Moat Cailin, and finally it was King's Landing. The crown was closer than ever, but so was the cost. By now his alliance with Stannis was no longer rumor, it was legend. Two kings divided by cause but united by enemy. The letters had turned into ravens, the ravens into messengers, and now, finally, men into movement. Stannis would march from the south, Robb from the north, and between them, the lion's den. But not everyone celebrated this pact. Roose Bolton watched from the shadows, quiet as ever. He had not spoken against the alliance, nor had he spoken for it. His silence was loud. Robb noticed, so did Catelyn, but neither called it out. Not yet. Instead, Robb doubled down on strategy. He called for the bannermen. Every house that bore the direwolf banner, Manderley, Glover, Karstark, Serwyn, was summoned for the final push. The war, it seemed, was reaching its end. But then came the letter. Not from Stannis, not from Tywin, from the Eyrie. Lysa Arryn was dead. Poisoned, they said. Thrown from the moon door, others whispered. No one knew the truth, but all agreed on one thing. The Vale now belonged to Sansa Stark. Yes, Sansa. The quiet girl they once pitied, the pawn of the Lannisters, the grieving daughter. She had played her role so well that no one saw the game she was playing. With Littlefinger at her side, she held the veil like a dagger pointed southward. And when her raven came to Robb, it bore a simple message. The Knights of the Vale ride for Winterfell. Our banners are yours. Boom. Just like that, the game changed again. Okay, pause. Are you seeing the pattern here? Robb's not just surviving, he's conquering. Every move is calculated, every step forward backed by steel and strategy. But the more pieces he gathers, the heavier the crown becomes. And trust me, that weight, it's about to crush something. Because not everyone in the north believed in this new Robb Lord Rickard Karstark, loyal once, brutal always, had grown restless. His sons had died under Robb's banner. And yet, the boy king made alliances. With Stannis spoke of southern politics and now embraced the Vale. This is not the war I followed you into, Karstark spat. Robb didn't flinch. It's the war that keeps us alive. But Karstark wanted blood, Lannister blood. He sent his men to kill captive prisoners, 2 teenage squires sworn to House Lannister. They were unarmed, harmless hostages, and he butchered them in the night. The act was treason. The timing, catastrophic. Robb had a choice to make. If he spared Karstark, the North would see him as weak. If he executed him, he'd lose one of his most powerful allies right before the biggest battle of the war. He remembered his father then, Ned Stark, who beheaded a deserter with his own sword, who taught him that the man who passes the sentence must swing the blade, and so he did. The execution was swift, public, brutal. Karstark's final words echoed in the snow. "You'll lose the North for this." Robb stood silent. But inside something cracked. That night Catelyn visited him. "He was wrong," she said. "You did what you had to." Robb didn't respond, not for a while. Then finally, "I've lost something I'll never get back." "His men?" she asked. He shook his head. "My people's hearts." And he was right. The Northern Lords didn't rebel, not openly. But they whispered, they wondered, and worst of all, they hesitated. Every victory Robb won came at a new cost. With each smart decision, a piece of the Old North slipped through. His fingers. Meanwhile, in the south, Tywin Lannister didn't rest. He saw the Vale join the war. He saw the Karstark blood spilled. He saw the Baratheon-Stark alliance harden like old steel. So he made his own move. He reached out to House Bolton. Rose received the letter in the dead of night. No words, just a seal and an offer. Winterfell, Warden of the North, total control. All he had to do was kill a king. And here's where things start to spiral because Roose didn't answer. Not yet. But he sent a raven to Ramsay, a single line. Soon. Back in the war camp, Robb plotted his final strategy. They would march to Moat Cailin, retake it from the Ironborn, and push south in tandem with Stannis' host. The timing had to be perfect. The strike swift, the victory absolute. He met with his generals. He dined with his wife. He sent letters to every ally, confirming their roles. Every piece was in place, except one. The next morning, the Frey girl, his queen, was found pale and cold, poison, no sign of forced entry, no note, no suspects. Robb froze, literally. For 10 long seconds he couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Then he screamed, a sound not of rage, but pure despair. Everyone assumed it was the Lannisters, Tywin, Cersei, even Tyrion. But in truth, no one knew, and that uncertainty, that was more dangerous than any army. It turned Robb reckless. He ordered a full march immediately. No more planning, no more waiting. The wolves were going to war. But in his haste, he forgot one thing. Rose. Bolton was still watching. And Ramsay. Ramsay was already moving. The wind howled across the north like a wounded beast. Snow had begun to fall early that year, thicker and more brutal than anyone remembered. And yet, the drums of war still thundered. Robb Stark stood on the edge of a map, his fingers hovering. Above the Twins, then to Moat Cailin, and finally Sir King's Landing. The crown was closer than ever, but so was the cost. By now his alliance with Stannis was no longer rumor. It was legend. 2 kings divided by cause but united by enemy. The letters had turned into ravens, the ravens into messengers, and now, finally, men into movement. Stannis would march from the south, Robb from the north, and between them the lion's den. But not everyone celebrated this pact. Roose Bolton watched from the shadows, quiet as ever. He had not spoken against the alliance, nor had he spoken for it. His silence was loud. Robb noticed. So did Catelyn, but neither called it out. Not yet. Instead, Robb doubled down on strategy. He called for the bannermen. Every house that bore the direwolf banner, Manderley, Glover, Karstark, Serwyn, was summoned for the final push. The war, it seemed, was reaching its end. But then came the letter. Not from Stannis, not from Tywin, from the Eyrie. Lysa Arryn was dead, poisoned, they said. Thrown from the moon door, others whispered. No one knew the truth, but all agreed on one thing. The Vale now belonged to Sansa Stark. Yes, Sansa. the quiet girl they once pitied, the pawn of the Lannisters, the grieving daughter. She had played her role so well that no one saw the game she was playing. With Littlefinger at her side, she held the veil like a dagger pointed southward, and when her raven came to Robb, it bore a simple message. The Knights of the Vale ride for Winterfell. Our banners are yours. Boom. Just like that, the game changed again. Okay, pause. Are you seeing the pattern here? Robb's not just surviving, he's conquering. Every move is calculated, every step forward backed by steel and strategy. But the more pieces he gathers, the heavier the crown becomes. And trust me, that weight, here's about to crush something, because not everyone in the north believed in this new Robb. Lord Rickard Karstark, loyal once, brutal always, had grown restless. His sons had died under Robb's banner. And yet, the boy king made alliances. With Stannis spoke of southern politics, and now embraced the Vale. This is not the war I followed you into, Karstark spat. Robb didn't flinch. It's the war that keeps us alive. But Karstark wanted blood. Lannister blood. He sent his men to kill captive prisoners, 2 teenage squires sworn to House Lannister. They were unarmed, harmless, hostages, and he butchered them in the night. The act was treason, the timing catastrophic. Robb had a choice to make. If he spared Karstark, the North would see him as weak. If he executed him, he'd lose one of his most powerful allies right before the biggest battle of the war. He remembered his father then, Ned Stark, who beheaded a deserter with his own sword, who taught him that the man who passes the sentence must swing the blade, and so he did. The execution was swift, public, brutal. Karstark's final words echoed in the snow. "You'll lose the North for this." Robb stood silent. But inside something cracked. That night Catelyn visited him. "He was wrong," she said. "You did what you had to." Robb didn't respond, not for a while. Then, finally, "I've lost something I'll never get back." "His men?" she asked. He shook his head. "My people's hearts." And he was right. The Northern Lords didn't rebel, not openly, but they whispered, they wondered, and worst of all, they hesitated. Every victory Robb won came at a new cost. With each smart decision, a piece of the old North slipped through his fingers. Meanwhile, in the south, Tywin Lannister didn't rest. He saw the Vale join the war. He saw the Karstark blood spilled. He saw the Baratheon-Stark alliance harden like old steel. So he made his own move. He reached out to House Bolton. Rose received the letter in the dead of night. No words, just a seal and an offer. Winterfell, Warden of the North, total control. All he had to do was kill a king. And here's where things start to spiral, because Rose didn't answer. Not yet. But he sent a raven to Ramsay, a single line. Soon. Back in the war camp, Robb plotted his final strategy. They would march to Moat Cailin, retake it from the Ironborn, and push south in tandem with Stannis' host. The timing had to be perfect. The strike swift. The victory absolute. He met with his generals. He dined with his wife. He sent letters to every ally, confirming their roles. Every piece was in place. Except one. The next morning, the Frey girl, his queen, was found pale and cold, poison. No sign of forced entry. No note. No suspects. Robb froze, literally. For 10 long seconds he couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Then he screamed, a sound not of rage, but pure despair. Everyone assumed it was the Lannisters, Tywin, Cersei, even Tyrion. But in truth, no one knew. And that uncertainty, that was more dangerous than any army. It turned Robb reckless. He ordered a full march immediately. No more planning, no more waiting. The wolves were going to war. But in his haste, he forgot one thing. Ruse. Bolton was still watching, and Ramsay was already moving. The march to Moat Cailin began under a blood-red sky. The Frey queen lay cold in her grave, but the war did not slow. Robb rode at the head of his army, face set like stone, his eyes hollowed by something deeper than grief. Resolve that bordered on madness. The North remembered, yes, but it also watched, and as the drums beat through the frost-covered woods, The North began to question, was this still Robb Stark, the young wolf? Or had something darker taken his place? Behind him, Roose Bolton rode in silence, ever the quiet man, ever the watcher. His banners still bore the flayed man, crimson against the snow, and though he had pledged himself to House Stark, he answered, to no one but his own ambition. The death of the Frey girl had unsettled the ranks. Some said she died of illness, others whispered poison. But Roose didn't whisper. He didn't need to. He simply waited. Meanwhile, Ramsay Snow moved like a shadow through the Dreadfort. The bastard of Bolton was unleashed. His father's raven had come, a single word burned into his mind. Soon. That meant freedom. That meant chaos. And Ramsay was good at chaos. With Winterfell weakened, its garrison stripped to reinforce. Robb's march, Ramsay struck. He didn't just take the castle, he ruined it. He flayed the remaining guards, hung their skins like banners. He captured Maester Luwin and fed his fingers to the dogs before letting him die slowly beneath the weirwood. And when Bran and Rickon, still hidden by loyal servants, were discovered in the crypts, Ramsay didn't kill them. Not yet. He wanted Robb to see. Back on the march, news was slow to travel. The snows deepened, the rivers iced, but the storm was building. And when the raven finally reached Robb, it nearly broke him. Winterfell. Taken. His brothers, captured, and the seal on the raven? A bloody, flayed man drawn in red wax. Robb crumpled the parchment in his fist. He didn't speak, didn't breathe, didn't blink. His men stood silent around him, afraid not of what was in the letter, but what it would awaken in their king. He turned to Roose Bolton. This was your bastard. Roose didn't deny it. I gave him orders to secure the North, not destroy it, Robb hissed. Roose's voice was calm. Too calm. You gave no orders. I acted in your silence. The tension in the command tent cracked like ice underfoot. Great Janumba stepped forward, hand on his sword. If he's betrayed us, Robb raised a hand. Not here, not now. But the damage was done, the illusion of unity shattered. And trust once broken does not mend. Okay, wait. Are you catching how twisted this is getting? Robb's campaign is on the edge of total victory, but betrayal is blooming inside his own camp. And Ramsay, he's not waiting for orders. He's planning something worse than death. Because while Robb debated with lords and generals, Ramsay sent another message. Not a raven. A gift, 2 bones, small, clean, wrapped in a child's cloak. They arrived at camp 3 days after the first letter, Rickon's, or maybe not. That was the genius of Ramsay's madness. He sowed doubt, not just pain. Was the boy dead? Was it a lie? Robb had no way of knowing, only that the games had begun. And so, in a moment that shocked even his mother, Robb changed course. He turned his army north. Stannis, marching from Dragonstone, was furious. The alliance depended on a southern push. With Robb retreating, the Lannisters would rally. The siege of King's Landing would collapse before it began, but Robb no longer cared. He didn't want the Iron Throne anymore. He wanted his home. He wanted vengeance, and he was willing to burn Westeros for it. Meanwhile, Sansa heard whispers in the Vale. She knew something had changed. The Knights of the Vale under her banner were ready to move, but now they waited. She wrote to her brother asking what had happened, begging for direction, but the ravens flew into storms. No reply came. Back in the north, Ramsay prepared. He lit fires in the crypts of Winterfell, painted grotesque symbols on the walls, set traps in the snow and poison in the meat. The bastard didn't want to win the war. He wanted to drag his brother into hell, and Robb marched straight into it. The first skirmish came outside Torrhen's Square. A trap. Dozens of his men died, not by sword, but by fire. Tar pits hidden beneath the snow, archers in trees. Screams. Filled the forest like ghosts come home. Robb survived. Barely. His armor scorched, his horse slain, his eyes black with ash. He said nothing. He didn't cry. But in his silence, men began to fear him because the boy was gone. What remained was something else. Even Catelyn saw it. She tried to speak to him one night, in the quiet between battles. "You're not sleeping," she whispered. "You're not you." Robb stared into the fire. "Maybe that's what it takes." to win, to survive. Then he stood, left the tent, never looked back, and the snow kept falling. By the time they reached the outskirts of Winterfell, the castle was nothing but smoke and bone. Ramsay had burned it again, this time not as a show of force, but as a challenge. Inside, he waited, and, beside him, two cloaked figures, small, quiet, one limping, the other staring, unblinking. "Shall we greet our brother?" Ramsay grinned. Because in Part 5, the gates open, and nothing that walks out will ever be the same. The snows had turned to ice, and Winterfell stood like a scar upon the land. Black smoke rising from its broken towers, bones buried beneath the ash. Robb Stark approached on foot, his horse left behind when the path grew too treacherous. Around. Him. His bannermen whispered prayers, muttered curses, or simply stared in stunned silence. This wasn't a siege anymore. This was a reckoning. They reached the outer gate. No resistance. No arrows from the towers. No boiling oil or flayed banners waving proudly from the battlements. Just silence. Too much silence. Robb held up his hand. His army stopped. He stepped forward alone, snow crunching beneath his boots, until he stood at the gate of the castle, where he'd been born. He placed one hand on the cold stone, scarred, scorched, and blackened, and whispered, "Open it." They used a ram, not because they needed to, but because no one trusted the quiet. The gates creaked open slowly, revealing a courtyard drowned in soot and blood. Bodies frozen in place, faces twisted in fear. Dogs tore at flesh in the corners. Ravens watched from the battlements like sentinels of death. But there were no defenders. No battle, just horror. Robb stepped through first, sword drawn. His cloak dragged through the ashes of his ancestors. And at the center of the yard, nailed to the heart tree, was a message carved in skin. "I have your wolves." Okay, did you catch that? Not, "I killed your brothers." Not, "I won." Ramsay didn't end the game, he started it. This wasn't war, this was theater. And Robb had just walked onto the stage. They cleared the castle room by room. Bolton men had left signs of a massacre, but no army, no garrison. Just traps, bones, and fear. And then they found the feast hall. It was set. Yes, set. As if waiting for guests. A long table with rotting meat, goblets filled with old wine, candles half melted. At the head of the table, 2 chairs. On one sat a stuffed wolf, its eyes gouged out, painted red. The other chair was empty, blood pooling beneath it, and on the table, 2 cloaks, child-sized, stark grey. Catelyn collapsed. Her scream echoed through the stones. The soldiers turned away, unable to stomach the sight. Robb said nothing. He stood at the doorway, fists clenched, eyes burning, not with grief, but with vengeance. "I want him found," he said, voice colder than the snow outside. "Alive." But Ramsay had already disappeared into the woods. Robb sent out search parties. Every path, every cave, every ruin, no sign of the bastard. Winterfell was his again, but it felt like a tomb, and then came the next blow. That same week, another raven. This one from Stannis. He'd been ambushed. The Lannisters had launched a desperate strike at Dragonstone, and with Robb's forces diverted north, Stannis was overwhelmed. The fleet was gone, his banners scattered, Melisandre missing, and the war back in Lannister hands. Catelyn begged her son to reconsider. "You still have the north, you can rebuild. Rule, just don't chase this ghost." But Robb wasn't listening anymore. He was already staring at the flayed man painted on the inner wall, blood smeared in handprints, a message scrawled beside, "Yet I left you a gift." The crypts, of course, he took 20 men, no more, trusted ones. They descended into the cold beneath the castle, where the dead Starks slept beneath stone wolves and ancient swords. The air was sharp, wet, heavy. And at the far end, beneath the statue of Lyanna Stark, was a door that had never been there before, a rough-cut tunnel, Ramsay's work. They followed it, deeper and deeper, past old bones and burnt earth, until it opened into a hidden chamber. One no Stark had ever built. Torches flickered, blood stained the walls, and at the center, chained to a stone slab, Bran alive, barely, thin, ghostly, bruised. But breathing, beside him a small pile of bones, Rickon's cloak, his toy soldier. Robb rushed forward, hands shaking. Bran's eyes fluttered open. One word escaped his lips, hoarse and broken. Trap. Too late. The chamber door slammed shut. Behind them, oil dripped from the ceiling. Fire flared. It wasn't just a message, it was an execution, except Ramsay hadn't counted on Grey Wind. The direwolf tore through the tunnel moments before the flames ignited, ripping the hinges off the chamber door, scattering the guards outside. Robb carried Bran through the smoke, his cloak burning, lungs screaming. But they made it, somehow. Barely. Rickon was gone, but Bran was alive, and now, so was Robb's rage. That night, as healers worked to keep Bran breathing, Robb sat in the great hall of Winterfell, alone. He stared at the broken heart tree. The blood from the message still clung to its bark, and he made a vow. Not just to find Ramsay, not just to kill him, but to erase House Bolton from history. Every name, every banner, every drop of blood. No flayed man would ever fly in the north again. In the distance, thunder rolled, not from a storm, from marching feet. Because Tywin, Lannister, was moving north, and he wasn't coming to fight, he was coming to end it. The North had never seen an army like this. Tywin Lannister came not with raiders or scouts, but with a legion. Tens of thousands. Polished armor, burning banners, siege towers wrapped in Lannister red. It wasn't just an army. It was a message. The lion wasn't hiding behind politics anymore. He was marching into the wolf's den, teeth bared, claws drawn. And for the first time in his campaign, Robb Stark didn't have the numbers. Not anymore. Too many men lost chasing Ramsay. Too many houses wavering after the Karstark execution. And now even the Freys hesitated. Yes, Robb had married their daughter. Yes, they were still technically bound to him. But loyalty in Walder Frey's world wasn't written in blood. It was written in opportunity. And Tywin had just offered him a better one. Still, Robb stood his ground. He didn't retreat. He didn't send envoys. He didn't beg for mercy. He summoned his remaining lords, Manderly, Glover, Umber, Serwyn, and laid out his final plan. We don't win this war by matching their numbers, he said. We win by making them bleed for every stone, every tree, every inch of ice-covered dirt between here and the gates. His voice carried the weight of Winterfell itself. Not just stone and snow, but ghosts, dead brothers, burned sisters, buried wolves. And it lit a fire in their chests that no Lannister blade could put out. Meanwhile, Tywin wasn't slowing. He'd learned from Robb's past victories. No blind charges, no overconfidence. Every move he made was precise, brutal, and deliberate. He set up camps like clockwork, dug trenches, sent scouts around every ridge. But he made one mistake. He underestimated the snow. 3 days out from Winterfell, a blizzard struck unlike anything his southern army had ever faced. Horses froze standing. Men wandered off and never returned. Siege towers collapsed beneath the weight of ice, and still, Tywin pushed forward. Winter is coming, he mocked, wrapped in lion fur cloaks. Then let it come. I'll turn it red. But in Winterfell, the wolves were already preparing the trap. Okay, this is where things get wild. Robb knows he can't win in open battle. But what if I told you he doesn't need to? Because what he sets in motion next is part warfare, part mythology. And it starts with the crypts. Again, Bran, still recovering, had changed. Ramsay's torture had shattered part of him, but awakened something else. The dreams had grown stronger, the visions clearer, and now they guided him to one place, the tomb of Lyanna Stark. He begged Robb to follow. Reluctantly, the king obeyed. They descended into the dark once more, torches flickering. Bran moved with purpose now, whispering names Robb hadn't heard since childhood. When they reached Lyanna's statue, Bran placed his hand on the cold stone and whispered a name. Jon. Robb froze. What did you say? But Bran didn't answer. His eyes rolled back, and for a moment, the crypt itself pulsed with cold. A vision struck him like a blade. A man. A sword, a tower in the south, a secret. Bran collapsed, bleeding from his nose. Robb caught him, heart pounding. What did you see? Bran whispered. He's not just our brother. But before Robb could ask more, a horn blew from the walls. The Lannisters had arrived. Thousands of torches lit the night, blazing through the snow like a burning sea. Siege towers moved into position. Catapults rolled into place. The Red Lion of Casterly Rock stared down the battered Wolf of Winterfell, and yet Tywin didn't attack. He waited, because he didn't need to break the walls. He was counting on someone inside opening the gates. Yes, treachery. And he had one last move. That night, a single rider approached the gates under a flag of parley. No guards, no escort, just one man, Jaime Lannister. Robb watched from the walls as the Kingslayer dismounted, armor gleaming even under the moonlight. The same man who pushed Bran from a tower, the same man who killed Robb's bannermen and mocked the North, but now he wasn't smiling. Robb descended to the gatehouse. "You've got balls showing up here," he said. Sword in hand, Jaime raised both hands, then cut them off. "But first, listen to what I've come to say." They met in the great hall of Winterfell. "No guards, just two kings without crowns. I didn't come for you," Jaime said. "I came for your brother." Robb stiffened. "You've got one left to take." "Not Rickon, Jon." Robb's eyes narrowed. "Jon's on the wall." "Not anymore." Jaime tossed a parchment across the table. A raven's letter, sealed by the Black Watch, signed by Maester Aemon. It read, "Jon Snow is gone. He marched north, into the lands of always winter. He follows a shadow." Bran gasped from behind the table. He felt it too. The long night had stirred, and Jon Snow had walked into it. Jaime leaned forward. "You can kill me. You can burn my army. But it won't matter. Something is coming, and Jon Snow is the only one who can stop it." Robb didn't speak. He didn't blink. And then, for the first time in months, he laughed. Short, bitter, hollow. "You Lannisters really will say anything to save your skins." Jaime stood. "I didn't come to save mine. I came to warn you." And as he left the hall, he whispered, "He's not your brother. He's your last hope." That night, Robb stood on the battlements as Tywin's army prepared to storm the walls. But now, he wasn't thinking about the siege. He was thinking about Jon, the truth, and the storm beyond the wall. Because maybe this war wasn't the real war. Maybe everything was about to change. To change. Dawn never came that morning. The sky above Winterfell bled red into grey, and the sun refused to rise through the thick curtain of snow and ash that hung over the north. It was as if the gods themselves had turned their faces from Westeros, as if the land could feel it, what was about to begin, the battle for Winterfell. Tywin Lannister stood in his war tent just outside the castle, surrounded by captains, siege engineers, and scouts. His armor was already on, polished, blood-red silk trimmed in gold. His expression remained unchanged, cold as the northern wind. "Today," he said, "we erase the wolf from the map." Meanwhile, inside the ancient walls of Winterfell, Robb Stark prepared to die, not because he wanted to, not because he thought they'd lose, but because he knew what came after this, win or lose. There would be no peace. He had already ordered the women and children into the crypts, guarded by every spare soldier not strong enough to fight. The banners of House Stark, old torn, stained in blood, hung above the walls like ghosts. He looked to Bran, seated in the corner of the war room, staring into nothing. Bran hadn't spoken since the vision, since the name Jon left his lips. "You saw something else," Robb said. Bran slowly turned to him. "I saw fire," he whispered, "and ice. Not just in battle, in him. In Jon." Bran nodded. "He's not just a Snow." But there was no time to ask more, because that's when the first horn blew. 3 short blasts, 1 for enemies approaching, 2 for a larger force, 3 was for death. Everyone froze. It came not from the Lannister lines, but from the north, the far north. A rider burst through the western gate, covered in frost, his horse barely alive. His face frozen, lips cracked, eyes wide with fear. He didn't even dismount. "They're coming!" he screamed. "The dead!" The courtyard exploded into panic. Robb rushed to him, grabbing the reins. "Who? Where?" The rider collapsed. Beyond the wall. Jon tried to stop them. He failed. "They're coming south. A storm of ice and bones. And they're not waiting." Bran stood up for the first time in days. "They'll be here by nightfall," he said, calm, empty, certain. Tywin didn't know. Robb turned to his bannerman. "Send a raven." "A white one." "The long night has begun. Okay, pause right here. Did you feel that shift? Because this is no longer just a battle for Winterfell. This is the moment when both sides, the wolf and the lion, realize that none of it matters if they don't stand together." And what Robb does next? No one saw it coming, not even Tywin. He mounted his horse personally, rode to the gates, and, with nothing but a white flag of truce tied to his spear, rode straight into the Lannister siege lines. The guards shouted. Bows raised, but Tywin stepped forward, face dark with confusion and contempt. Robb raised his voice loud enough for all to hear. The war is over. Call your banners. Tell your men to dig trenches. Light every fire they can, because by nightfall we'll be fighting for all of Westeros. Tywin stared at him like he was mad. You expect me to believe this isn't a trick? You think I'd ride out here alone if it were? Tywin's jaw clenched, but in his eyes fear, just a flicker. Just for a second he turned to Sir Keevan. Verify the claim now. That night, the ravens stopped flying. Not because they were blocked, because they were killed. One by one the northern watchtowers went dark. Smoke rose from villages that were never supposed to fall, and at the edge of the forest figures moved silent, pale, hundreds of them. Then thousands, no screams, just death. They came with the snow, and just before midnight Jon Snow returned, not through the gate, not through the woods. He rode through the main road, covered in ice, dragging a shattered sword, his direwolf ghost limping beside him. The gates opened at once. Robb rushed out, not believing what he saw. Jon. But it wasn't the boy he remembered. This man was different, changed, eyes darker, shoulders heavier, and behind him, a single rider in red, Melisandre. She said nothing, just stared at Bran, and Bran smiled. For the first time in days now, he whispered. It begins. Jon looked at Robb, his voice hoarse. You should have gone south. Robb shook his head. I had to save Winterfell. You saved nothing, Jon said. You delayed the end. Robb tried to ask what that meant, but the horns started again, 1, 2, 3. Then silence, and then the screams, because the dead had arrived. Not just whites, not just walkers. A white walker giant stepped out of the forest first, a crown of frozen antlers upon its skull, wolves made of bone behind it, shadows riding shadows, and at the center the Night King. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He raised one hand, and the Lannister dead began to rise. Soldiers who had frozen on the march, scouts lost in the woods, even old bones. Buried in the battlefield, they rose, and they turned, not toward the north, but toward Tywin.